I'm thrilled to be here this morning with Liz Diller and get us started this morning. So Liz, tell us about what the pressing issues have been that have emerged as sort of the leading points of instigation in your practice.
Okay, well, just out of school and having studied art, I had no intention of being an architect. Did an architecture degree, but then it seemed like there was some space to really work across media, but on issues around space, which were, I felt, architectural issues. Our studio with Rick Scofidio, my partner, we pursued a lot of independent projects. They were all generated on credit cards and grants, and at the time that there were grants around. And we were very happy to work independently. Kind of we were on the outside, and then we came a little bit more into the inside. And we felt that it would be a better place to be a critic from the inside if one could be stealthy and be invited, and then we could, push the envelope of the discipline and provoke certain issues around space, publicness, privateness, issues around technology and architecture. There were many trajectories of our interests. And one of them had to do with the politics of architecture. Can there be a politic? Anyway, the research was pretty, going in various different directions. At some point, we were invited to do some more traditional kind of model of architecture where there was a client, and so we pursued that. We did a housing project in Japan, for example, for subsidized housing, and that was truly interesting. But still, the experiments, every project was an experiment. At the point that Blur occurred, it was, I would say that there were a couple of landmark moments. There was a house that was called the Slow House, which was around 1990. And it was a concept house which had a real client, and it started to be built and never got finished. But it was the first time that I became convinced that it's possible to have ideas and make buildings at the same time. So, and so that was, and even though it was never completed, it was part of the Museum of Modern Art's collection. It was widely published. So it really kind of happened, even though it wasn't executed physically. And I would say that perhaps the next project after that was really a significant moment was Blur. And the reason was, so this is on the lake in Neuchâtel in Switzerland. It was part of the Expo 2002. And we were given the opportunity to do a pavilion of some sort, and we decided that the pavilion would show nothing, and it would use the material of the site, which was water. And basically by bringing the water, piping the water through and filtering it through and shooting it through a high pressure system, creating a big cloud which could be inhabited and the public could walk through. Now, of course, there was nothing to see or do there, but it was this, large environmental scale kind of architectural sculpture. But there were no walls, there was no anything, there was no ceiling, it was just all fog on a platform. And it was very curious that the building authorities wanted us to put sprinklers in there. There were 32,000 nozzles of water. It was all made up out of water, and they insisted on. So, they had a question about whether this was a building or not a building. So that was a really interesting problem. But anyway, this kind of vast environmental sculpture, inhabitable. And for the first time, we were starting to think about audience. And I think that was it was not just the technology, it was not just like pushing the limits of what defines architecture, but audience started to matter. And so we had a following of art and art people, professionals, and as well architecture students and so forth. This was for the first time a mass audience kind of spectacle, and any age group, any education level, the people came from all over the world. And we started to understand the kind of layers that are possible, and that project was able to hold a kind of, our own theory, which was fairly sophisticated and had to do with perception and Damish's theory on the cloud and so forth. And then there were, this became an interpretation machine. I mean, many people thought about it as representing the ascension or something, and very strange. Oh, and also the Swiss doubt, which was kind of a curious moment in Swiss history where it wasn't neither here nor there, it's still the same. But so the blur was a kind of machine to make meanings off of. But it was very interesting that we drew a much larger crowd and we understood these kind of onion skin layers of interpretation that are buildings, if we put them out in front, that we could be attending to. So that was very important. And then after that, a lot of people said, how would you apply that to your architecture? We figured, well, there's no way to really apply it. It's just, it was a recognition of a sort of different material use and different way of using real-time computing and having different kinds of experience, thinking about vision and so forth. So in all the ways that all projects add up and accumulate into your work.
That's wonderful. And you talked just a second ago, you mentioned the difficulty of holding on to ideas in practice. I think, lots and lots of architects have ideas. Architects are incredibly creative people by nature, but it is that challenge of holding on to the idea and making it happen through the manifestation of the building. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about those challenges and specifically thinking about that in relationship to another thing you mentioned, which is your firm's kind of persistent efforts to push the boundaries of the definition of practice. In some ways politically, in some ways just, for example, with Blur, helping us rethink what it means to be inside and outside and having different kinds of optical experiences and sensate experiences. So how do you hold on to those ideas and make them real in practice and continue to push at the boundaries as your practice becomes busier, more complex, and so on?
Well, first of all, the ideas first, they come from wherever they come from, and there's a compulsion to do something. And like in the case of Blur, we absolutely, we had this idea that water was not just the site, the lake, but it was going to be the building material, it was going to be the interference in the optical system, and that specifically had to do with expos, always kind of pushing the envelope technologically to show you the most, the newest technological marvel, high fidelity, and so forth. And so we wanted to make a low-res experience, really, to defeat but through technology. So we're not anti-technological. It was just that assumption of high definition and pixels per inch kind of culture. So when we had this idea and we put it on the table, we won the competition, and then we had to do it, and we had no idea how to do it. How do you make a cloud the size of a football field, and that wouldn't, that's made out of lake water that's filtered? How do you make the mist stay in one place where there's wind? How do you, something that we found out much later on is that when you inhale atomized water, if it isn't absolutely purified, like way purer than drinking water, your lungs can't deal with it, and you could basically create Legionnaire's disease for an entire population.
Not good.
So, we learned all this as we were going along, and so, it was the persistence of having this vision and wanting to do it through all naivete. Just naivete is very important, because if we had known then, what we learned later, we would have never done it. And so, each of our projects somehow is like jumping off the cliff without a parachute and then figuring out how we can manufacture something to make a soft landing. And I think that is, that's kind of the key, because I can see that when one advances in their work, you start to get a little bit more concerned about, what people are thinking about you and whether you can actually do it for the budget, and so you think about too many things.
Well, I see that it looks like we have your PowerPoint ready. I know everybody is interested in seeing your work, so we'll pause with our conversation and let you start.
Okay, fantastic. So these are kind of ensnarled projects. It's a cluster of projects, and just starting with the High Line project that we did, and this was one of the most important urban initiatives in New York, mile-and-a-half long stretch of obsolete urban infrastructure, saved from demolition and transformed into an urban park. And the impetus came from these two citizen activists. I mean, this is something that we truly believe in, that you can build a project ground up. You don't have to wait to receive instruction from others. The little bit of background, the High Line was built during the Depression, and it functioned for 50 years, distributing freight to warehouses all throughout Chelsea and the Meatpacking District. And when the highway system really started to become more important and truck distribution took over, the High Line went to ruin. And just kind of, this was our video when we came and started to do our research for the competition. And you could see how, I mean, it's just very surreal, and it just moves through in and out of spaces that you would never ordinarily see. It was inaccessible, it was illegal to get up here. Anyway, from the streets, all you could see was this rusty steel structure flying through the block. Now you could imagine how difficult this was as a sell to the city, because Giuliani wanted to just knock it down. All the property owners felt that it devalued the adjoining sites. The High Line was sold, in a way, to the city as a catalyst for development. And like most things are sold because there will be a financial reward at some point. And so this was, when the city was growing northward, this was a big issue that came up. In our time, it was also these photos, beautiful photos that were taken by Joel Sternfeld. He showed this otherworldly place. I mean, this is clearly a different time of year than when we shot ours, but it was at different times of year very beautiful, and you could start to taste the possibility of a park up there. Anyway, there was a competition, we won. We were very inspired by, okay, so these are some more of Joel's, but we were really inspired by what we found there, which was this accidental landscape that flourished when the High Line went to ruin. And over the years, it developed its own ecosystem. You know, so there were seeds that blew off of train cars, and it was totally opportunistic. There were lots of alien species, like 100 or so. And these were based on these microenvironments of sunny areas and shady areas and wet areas and sun-drenched and so forth. And just these urban contexts produced this, these different ecosystems. So we were very inspired by that, and we wanted to work with that. Anyway, for example, these sumac trees that grew in this shady area between two tall buildings. So we were very inspired by this notion of kind of decay cycle of culture is taken over by nature, is taken over by culture, by nature, and so forth. We're very interested in that, and we were interested in somehow preserving the melancholia of the site, and this notion of kind of yielding to in the case of the ruin, to nature. And so the surface of the High Line was inspired by that, and is basically, we call it agritecture, and it's a kind of new blend of the vegetal and the mineral, and it's basically a surface digitized into hard and soft scape in small units that could be ganged up into areas that could be that require high traffic, so 100% hardscape, to richly vegetated biotopes of 100% soft, and endless varieties of in between. That's really what the main idea was. And these tapering pieces of concrete were there to open joints and encourage emergent growth. So basically, that's the language. And very, very simple. Everything was made out of the paver system. And these are just some atmospheres now. The third phase of the High Line just recently opened. Again, just going to do some more atmospheres through. Many of you might have already been here. So there was a lot of unintended consequences that came out of the High Line, and I'll just show you a couple. So here, this tenement had, by accident, there was a light that, construction light, that just was shown on one of these tenement windows, and that's the light. And it happened to be that a cabaret singer lived just behind there, and she would come out every night and sing for the audience. And these are the things, like, you can't come up with anything better than this kind of stuff. She became called the Renegade Cabaret, and was quite a phenomenon. This was the Standard Hotel that was built. It's not our design, but it was built over the High Line. It was the last one that was permitted by zoning. And people started to perform in front of the windows. And, again, it was amazing, and got these off the internet, and there was a ready, willing audience below that, so there were these kind of weird things that happened, and then it became very, important pop culture. This is establishing shot for the Family Guy, Marvel Comics, and this is a perfume that was marketed as, this has nothing to do with the High Line, but it was marketed as High Line Bond Number 9, the world's first railroad fragrance. And it advertises the scent of wildflowers, green grasses, and urban renewal. So this weird industrial chic is one of the products of the High Line, so-called High Line effect. And I'll just show a couple more images. I mean, this is what we call the 10th Avenue overlook, and it's just a spur that was there before. We just simply cut a hole in it and made some glass just in front so the public can just look at 10th Avenue, and you could just see the change there. And this is the view from there. And we think part of the theory was that the reason why the High Line has become so popular is that New Yorkers are introduced to the principle of doing nothing. And, because most of the time we're on our devices, or, we're working, or we're burning calories, or we're always doing something. But here, actually everything is prohibited, so you can't throw balls, you can't bring a bike, you can't do rollerblades, you can hardly do anything but sit and look and walk. And so it's kind of like, and that would be the most extreme spot where nothing is encouraged, watching taillights. Now, we all know that High Line has gone viral, and there's something like 36 cities and locations, last count, that are rushing to turn their obsolete infrastructure into public parks, aspiring to create a kind of High Line effect of their own. And Bloomingdale Trail is one of those in Chicago. We competed for that, and we didn't make it, so we're actually upset. But anyway, but there's something to be said about what makes the High Line unique, and it's an urban park. I mean, typically you go to the park to get out of the city. One goes to the High Line to enter the city, specifically the city's unconscious. And the High Line presents a kind of collage of the incongruous, the unintended, the overlooked, and the implausible. And where the logics of other cities will start to take place in these other initiatives, we have yet to see how successful they'll be. But what's so great, and we really feel like we've accomplished something, that leaders around the world are creatively repurposing infrastructure rather than tearing it down. So, while it might not kind of have this, it will have something else. I want to introduce a new project, Culture Shed, at the very top of the, I guess this isn't pointing, but at the very top of, so this is the High Line, that's the very north, the river is to the left, and this is the location. It's on the, in a new development, a brand new development. It's going to be very tall and very massive on the west side of Manhattan, over the active train tracks. Now, this is the growth of that area. It's going to be like Hong Kong in Manhattan. But what happened was that the city preserved a small piece of land here, this 21,000 square foot property, and put out an RFP to anyone that had an idea about a new cultural institution expanding or coming up with a new cultural institution. This was 2008. The economy was really bottoming out, and basically no one responded to this but us. I think we're the only response with our collaborator, David Rockwell. And we thought this could be really interesting, and especially in light of the downturn of the economy, we could maybe think about a new model of cultural entrepreneurship that's not dependent on the conventional models of fundraising. And at the same time, we thought New York doesn't have a lot of things that it should. It doesn't have a Kunsthal. It doesn't have truly an interdisciplinary space. These were the main elements. It had to be transdisciplinary. New York had lots of museums and theatrical spaces, but it didn't have a place that put visual and performing arts together, and also with creative industry. It didn't have truly a flexible space that could use as much as it needed to, that could serve changing needs of artists in the future. What does art look like in 2020, 2030? Scalability was very, very important. Why not have some place that's big, but also have something small when you need it? It didn't have a place that was unbranded. Everything was Guggenheim or MoMA or the Met. How about a place that had a kind of very low signature in a way, but could take lots of things? And self-sustainability, this is on the financial level, self-sustainability. The only kind of model at all remotely close was Cedric Price's Fun Palace, and this was designed in the 60s, never executed. But it was a kind of machine for making art, and this was also in our minds. It's, you know, in order to make something truly flexible, you really just need open infrastructure and a way of taking loads, a way of changing out equipment, a way of just providing bigger and smaller space. And so we were inspired by that. This is the model of the financial self-sustainability that we do co-produced and presented events of exhibitions, performance, and public events. And then there are income-generating events that are all related to creative industry and different ways of intersecting the in-between. So here's the building. It's, again, at the north edge of the High Line, and it takes up 300 linear feet. Base building and a telescoping outer shell. And that outer shell allows us, when expanded, to expand the footprint, double the footprint of the space. And it allows us to take extra large exhibitions and performances. It allows us to also generate income while not inhibiting the stuff that's in the galleries, which are stacked in the base building. We use gantry crane technology, and this is just a little animation showing how it works. It touches down on 6 points. The walls fly open, and you can get that very large footprint. And this is super old. It's actually indoor-outdoor space. It's totally conditioned, but when the doors are flown open, it's an outdoor space with the infrastructure overhead. And these are the different modalities of free public programming throughout the building, or for profit, or anything in between. And typical gallery space. This is the space of the shed, very large, exuberant. We worked a lot on the definition of the structural and mechanical is all that there is here. So there's not a whole lot. And then above, the roof basically engages everything, and it's basically a large theater deck that you can allow anything to happen there. Okay, this is shot from the outside. This is from the north, and it's basically surrounded by air on 3 sides, so it's a very unique opportunity in Hudson Yards. And I wanted to show this very quickly, this animation. And so this is the old historic New York with the trains. Trains are a theme, or moving structures. That's the active train yard that will be decked over. And then here's the shed going up. And this is connected to the next project. I'm going to try to make it through very quickly, but this animation is cool, so I have to just show it. Some of our mechanical equipment is there. So it takes 5 minutes literally to move it. Truck going into the loading berths. But because of the topography, this is 30th Street on 31st Street, you can actually drive a truck up and unload it from the and use the shed as actually a gantry in itself, and you could load into the galleries. I mean, just, you know, as we proposed this, this is happening. I have to pinch myself. It's happening. We started it as a bunch of architects just thinking stuff up, and then we brought it to, the city nurtured it for a couple of years, just got a national endowment grant to just pursue the work. They didn't discourage us, let's say. And then at a certain point, it really took, and the city wanted to do it, and then supported it for a while, and then it has become an independent, non-for-profit with a board, and we're about to announce the executive director. So it's a kind of, you know, it's amazing that architects would have this kind of agency to actually dream something up and make it happen. So there is really, this is a paradigm shifting project. Nothing like this really exists anywhere. And, you know, part of the model is that it's not entirely financially self-sustaining, but largely. But when you don't want to heat or cool the space and you don't want to program it, you just bring the shed in. This is Fashion Week, and that brings in a ton of income. So, you know, maybe while this is playing, I'm going to talk about the next project because, and I know we have little time, but, you know, if you pay attention to the building on the left, that's actually a residential tower that we got roped into doing because our original site was floating free of the location, that 21,000 square feet that was designated for this project. Now because of the shed idea, we needed more space. So we needed to push our site against the future residential tower that was going to be there. And in an effort to protect the culture shed, we accepted the invitation to do a residential tower. We have never done anything commercial like that in our lives. But in this intertwined world where we did the High Line for the city, and Friends of the High Line, we made up a project that basically grew a following and a board and a non-for-profit culture shed. Now we were asked by a by a commercial entity to do this big tower. So, and I won't get too much into the tower, but it was a very interesting experience for someone that started doing art in the street. Okay, so this was the original site. This is what we did to make it happen. It sits right there, the tower and culture shed. And for the tower itself, we wanted to really do something different in the middle because tops and bottoms were taken in architecture. And the idea was that the lower units were rental, the upper were condos. How do we take one geometry and turn it into the other? We did that through lacing corset. And so that was the model, and here was the first, kind of physical model, and that's the way. Some of the technologies that we work with to kind of get to where we need to. So there's the tower with the High Line. Now, the top 8 stories of the tower are able to take our back of house. So we are actually opportunistic. The fact that we're doing both for different clients allows us to bridge desires and needs. And so our freight elevator, our egress stairs, our green rooms, our offices, storage, and all of that is offloaded into the tower space. So we've gone, you know, a long, long distance from this the tower is a ruin, the High Line is a ruin, to the High Line as immensely successful, much more successful than anybody could have ever imagined. And right now, there are many brand name architects that are doing buildings all over the High Line. So just looking at this whole area comprehensively, it's very strange that we went from an urban blight to High Line Park attracts $2 billion in new developments. So Giuliani wanted to tear it down. All of a sudden, it becomes something that would have been appealed to Giuliani, but it's scary to us. And so we started off as being the High Line architects. Now, how can we protect the High Line from architecture? And and so this kind of consciousness was super important. And you know, as you see, you know, there are remnants still of industrial culture, but these glass towers are like shooting up, like blades of grass all over. And so that brings us to the very last thing, which is, you know, project in progress. It's a large, independently put together opera that we're putting together. We invited David Lang to be the composer and a whole group of writers to help write it. But basically, we're very interested in the following thing. Vestiges of industry bordering on the High Line linger in limbo while glass condos sprout like new shoots of glass everywhere. All poignant reminders that the High Line may ultimately fall victim to its own success and homogenizing effects of urban development. For now, the High Line remains a microcosm of a city in a delicate balance between vacancy and gentrification. So this, in this opera, the city is the protagonist, and it's basically, the opera is spread into basically 13 micro operas or 13 micro sites. All the sites are off the High Line. The audience will wander on the High Line, and there will be, and this is really the kind of new inventive part of this, there will be an orchestra in the middle, and there will be a musical infrastructure that's composed, and that infrastructure is basically piped in to all of the remote sites. So the small groups of instrumentalists or singers at each of the 13 sites will be adding layers to this infrastructure, and as you move up and down the High Line as a viewer and appreciator of this opera, you will basically be, it's like moving to different sides of the Met Opera stage. You'll hear different things, but it's all happening progressively in real time. And you can, and all of these, the writers that will be writing for this, they're all New Yorkers, and they're all going to be writing contemplations around the post-industrial city. That is, the city that we know as a place of production, moving to a place of consumption, and this kind of, I would say, some kind of you know, death-life cycle, which we, you know, I've talked about before in the High Line itself. But what we're very interested in the lyrics and the opera being a big theme is hearing these diverse voices. Each is paired with a site, and each is a discrete urban meditation as you move through the infrastructure, and caught between a sense of nostalgia for an irretrievable past and apprehension of a potentially alienating future. So this is the very thing, this very space of limbo, of the in-between, this time of limbo, of the in-between, when we could still look backwards and forwards at the same time. And I'll just go there. Thank you.
So my immediate reaction as a scholar is, wow, neato. There's some really great stuff there. I'm going to just ask one more question before we open it up to the audience for questions. And you talked just now about diversity of voices in the opera along the High Line. And diversity of voices is something that in the practice of architecture, as you know, has been a bit of a problem. And I've recently become aware of a project that's being run, I think, by the San Francisco American Institute of Architects called the Missing 32%, in which they're addressing the fact that in architecture schools nationwide, 50% of the students are women and 50% are men, but when we look at professional practice, only about 15 to 18% of those licensed practitioners are women. So the missing 32%, what happens to them? You're such a leader, you're such a role model for many, for people, all kinds of people, but especially for young women looking at the future of practice, and we so need that diversity of voices. What can you tell us that might help us understand where that missing 30% goes and what happened, why they're missing?
It's one of those great mysteries. And I teach, 50% of my students are women. And in fact, as they leave school, they're still dispersed, and very young architects are spread out. It's when women start to have children and leave, many offices are not forgiving about that, and there's a kind of out-of-touchness that happens in the first years. What we try to do is provide sufficient maternity leave, bring in women just after they've had kids, try to supplement income, do things that we can do to encourage women to come back as early as they can. But a lot of dads now are doing the same thing. We're trying to encourage dads that are now become house husbands. So I think it's very much rooted to the family thing. Mm-hmm. And so as much as one can do to support women staying in the profession, I think that also one can't deny that it's still perceived as a male industry, and that a lot of independent women have not formed practices. There are a couple of handfuls, but it's not as common. I think we're seeing now more collectives, collaborations, men, women, and multiples. Some of the issues around authorship are starting to be lifted, that notion of the heroic male white figure being lifted, and I think we're going to maybe see some change there as well.
I hope so. Well, thank you. With that, I know there must be many questions from our audience. I see a hand already going up.
I was wondering what you could tell me are the thematic differences between the Bloomingdale Trail and the High Line, and what was it about your vision that the decision makers in Chicago didn't accept?
Maybe there's some in the audience, I don't know. No, I think it's a very different physical entity, and this is where the particular sites and the initiatives in various cities, there are different problems, and Bloomingdale Trail goes through some private areas, zones, and very small, low areas, and it's just a very different feel. So we didn't actually make a proposal. It was more of an RFP and responding to kind of some general things. So I don't know. I think that the thing that makes the High Line almost like a shoe-in, it makes it so much easier than a lot of the other locations that are being looked at now, is that already the juxtapositions are so curious and so weird, and so there's super juxtaposition. So you have you're moving in and out of buildings. You have you're moving by churches, next to loft buildings, past crevices with smokestacks, with car lifts to one side, and big billboards with underwear ads on the other. And the sheer juxtaposition of the density of this part of New York, even though it was blown out over the years, produces almost a perfect canvas of things to look at. So that's part of the interesting thing about the High Line, which both Bloomingdale Trail and other kind of initiatives, it's not only a place to stroll and a place to maybe bike or to go more slowly and not take streets. It's a vantage point to see something that you haven't seen before. And in the case of the High Line, 30 feet up, you can move from street to street without stopping for a green light, which New Yorkers are not used to. And you can see the unofficial side of New York that is kind of the sides of things, the unattractive things, that's what gave it a kind of status of as an alternative park. So it's not the way New York likes to present itself, but there are these very curious and beautiful, strange views. So I think all of that, and also because, it wasn't the first, it was the Promenade Plantée in Paris, what preceded the High Line, but somehow the High Line becomes the model. But there's, I think because it was really like in most people's imaginations was the first one, and almost, anything after that has to kind of hit that mark. So it shouldn't be compared. They shouldn't be compared. Like each site is absolutely unique, and that's why I said, at the end, there are these 36 types of High Line-inspired infrastructural changes, and what's most important is that leaders are seeing infrastructure as part of sustainability strategy, and so it costs a lot to take some of these things down. But why not have a kind of alternative place that has, is protected from everywhere else, has a kind of linearity, which is very much like the promenade, and kind of use it for that. So it's a phenomenon.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah.
I'm curious where you see your firm in the next 5 years.
Oh, wow. We keep trying to plan like the next day, and we're not really good at that. I have to say that our studio is so unlike most studios. When people come and work for us, we think everything's normal, and they say, it's chaos in your studio, and you don't know it. We're constantly, I think part of it is that we have basically myself, Rick Scofidio, Charles Renfro, and Ben Gilmartin are four prime designers that are really working on everything all the time. And then we have, while that's true, we also have a bottom up. So all the youngsters are contributing to everything, and there's no real set order on how ideas are taken. What we've been trying to do is always keep a balance of projects that make us think, about something new for the first time. So, the second museum is certainly not as exciting as the first. The second public park, we're doing one in Moscow now, near the Kremlin, and certainly the context is very different. But making a park, thinking about a public park, is already, we're taking everything that we know already. But we're always looking for the next challenge, like truly unique challenge. Culture Shed represents that for us. This opera actually represents that as well. And maybe that's the best way that I can answer the question, is that the more there are many experiments to be done, and we're never going to just repeat the same thing just to do another job or just to keep everybody fed in the studio. We're always, interested in pushing something forward. And all these interrelated projects are, I showed this cluster because they're, we really work that way. There's a feeding off of projects. I think that we'd like to be more entrepreneurial. We'd like to bring more projects to the table. We make a case out of not being autonomous, of trying to make a network. And then we learned that working, being patient, building consensus, doing some things that really seem hard and nasty for architects because they're just not fast, not very profitable at all. But you can really make some huge inroads, and we did in the last decade with Lincoln Center, with a High Line work that we're doing in other parts of the city. So our own city has been a kind of great laboratory. We're starting to work in different parts of the world. We're doing a project in Brazil, and one in China, and one in Russia. And so I see that, I would love to work more outside of the United States.
What about the size of your practice? Does the size of the firm, I would guess that you don't want to get too large if you're going to be able to do the kind of innovation that you do and work the way that you work in a kind of productively chaotic environment, it sounds like. Yeah. How do you think about, the future of the firm and keeping it at just the sort of optimum size?
We said that 12 was the absolute limit. And then when we were 18, we said, okay, maybe we can go to 24 at most. And then it was 35, and then it was 48, and then it was 60. And 60 seemed like I mean, everyone understands in architecture, that's a kind of limit. After that, you have major infrastructural problems. So then we got to 80, and we're just out of control, and then we're like at 110. And I every time I say something that's really, that's very determined about limiting the growth, I turn around and just eat my words. I do think that there is a kind of ecosystem to having just a handful of designers that are meddling in everything, like real control freaks. And if you start to go past a certain point, you can't control it. And I think that's really it. I mean, we are really at that outer edge right now where it's very difficult and we need to maybe shrink a little bit. But we've learned how to operate at that size. And frankly, some of the projects that you're seeing can't be done with a small office. Especially Lincoln Center, we're doing a couple of projects we're doing several museums at the same time. We're doing several university projects at the same time. And so there's an appetite to actually do more, not to be, not to score points, not to be bigger for the sake of being bigger, but some of the opportunities are just so fabulous that it's very difficult to let them go.
Sure, yeah.
Excellent presentation. I'm excited about the culture shed. What's the status of that adjacent building and the shed itself? When we go to New York, will we soon be able to see construction?
Actually, construction has already started on there's the covering of the active train yards for Long Island Railroad. So that's a really, really complicated project. We are just on the terra firma side of that train. Basically, it's a depot. And work has already started. And so if you go there today from the High Line, you could also already see the structure that it's going to take to hold the tracks where the 6 wheels of the shed are going to be traveling. And anything that's below ground and below the plaza level is being done right now. Starting June, we're going to be seeing the larger parts of the construction going into place. The larger development, which is something like 13 million square feet of multi-use buildings, commercial, office, and all of that. Coaches there, Time Warner will be there, and other locations. So it's really going to be like Manhattan's going to be tipping, like the center of gravity is going to be moving there, and it's very strange. I'm not sure we endorse it all, and the mass of stuff there, but nevertheless, we did get our opportunities that we could have never gotten them anywhere else in the city. So everything will be growing all at once, and will open, Culture Shed will open at the same time as the residential tower, which will be 2018. So 2017 will be finished with construction and move in 2018. So we've raised already, I think, more than 2/3 of the costs, right now everything what's so unusual about this project is that the institution is being formed at the same time as the architecture is being developed, and there's a dialogue between the building and the conception of the institution. So one doesn't follow the other.
It's very exciting, yeah.
Would you say a few words about your project for the Museum of Modern Art and how, now adding on to what Taniguchi has done, do you just think individually from that or to connect with some of his plan?
So it's probably the most complicated project. This one, a moving building, seems hard. MoMA is far harder because it's an existing building. But it's not just the Taniguchi. There's the Pelly part, there's the Durrell Stone part, there's the Philip Johnson part. There is the site of the Folk Art Museum of Todd Williams and Bill Chen. There's the next door to the west is the Jean Nouvel's tower, and so there's the expansions mostly in there. So not only will we get one set of architects angry at us, we're going to get everyone angry at us because we're going to touch everything. But it has been a super complicated challenge. So the Taniguchi, not everyone is entirely enthused about the Taniguchi renovation. what we're trying to do is we're entering the project trying to make an institution that's already incredibly powerful and very, very successful, which the public is not always enthusiastic about going there because the experience of going to the museum is not the best, because it's crowded, because it's very difficult to navigate, you don't always know where you are, and things like that. So we're trying to improve on the general conditions of the museum, and including the Taniguchi, and in a way that actually brings out some of the best features of the Taniguchi building. So I think that when you see our intervention in Taniguchi, it's going to feel like that building is better than I thought. And, but it's because some of it got changed in, you know, and probably Taniguchi might have wanted a lot of the things that we're trying to do backwards. So we're reverse engineering some of the things that have happened to that building. We're also trying to fix some of the circulation that's there that really just never worked. You know, the escalators being the center of gravity, you don't know where you are. The way that, I mean, most people don't know that the collections are chronological and they start at the top and you go through loops. Most people don't even know where to start those loops. And so we're trying to address that. At the same time, the site that was, where the Folk Art Museum was, and that unfortunately, you know, and I'm sure you all read about it, it was a very, very tough thing for the studio to go through. We tried to work with the building. It was impossible to actually accomplish anything that we wanted or MoMA wanted. So we're trying to use the site of this building to have MoMA do something it doesn't normally do. So to make it special, and we're putting a stack of new, very tall galleries there that are for performance, that are for the projects room, which used to be, it no longer exists, but it used to be in the Philip Johnson part, and in fact it was the first architecture show that they had in the projects room was us, and so we are very sensitive to that, and we felt that was a big loss, as close to the street as possible. In this case, we're going to make the projects room on the street. So that stack of new destinations will be able to take very new contemporary programming that is being done just for, you know, it's not part of collections, it's being done as special independent projects. And in the Nouvelle component is where the big expansion is, and most people don't know just how much great work is in storage that MoMA has, that it actually doesn't have a lot of area to show. I mean, that's the truth. And maybe if one could fault Taniguchi, is that a lot of space went to, to public space, atrium and so forth, and maybe not enough to galleries. So 30% additional gallery space for the collections, and this will allow a lot of the fantastic stuff, you know, across 20th century. And what it will do, and this is what really makes us very enthusiastic about the project, is that there's a whole new group of curators there that are working collaboratively across disciplines. So we're going to see shows that tell the story of modernism in different ways, not just always in the same chronologies, not always discipline, on disciplinary borders. So we have photography and prints collaborating with architecture, with film and video and performance, and and just being able to combine things in new ways. And also beyond the normal geographies, Western geographies.
That's very exciting. It'll be great for MoMA to have that opportunity.
What would you tell a young person pursuing the study of architecture about the intersection between architecture and art, and the arts more broadly?
I would tell them that that's, if you're interested in space, you're interested in dance as well, and you're interested in the stage, and you're interested in film as well, and how to depict space in film. I think it's impossible to think like an architect without engaging, without at least thinking about all these different spatial conventions. This convention, even my being here and your being there, how to break that wall and how to change things up. So as architects take on normal commissions of an auditorium, one can start to have empathy about the choreographer that's going to be on that stage and how to think through that lens, that could make a theater better, whether you're actually engaged in the choreography or not. But I do really believe that, it's a time when a lot of people are, not respecting those borders. And even though our culture is set up there and the funding is there and university departments are defined that way and faculties and so forth, everyone has to, I think, just really put in an effort, because in 10 years, in 15, 20 years, it's just going to look different. The landscape is going to be very different. Technology is changing everything. I think that people are having less belief, like cultural leaders, in what traditional museums do, in what traditional performing arts centers do, and it's just, there are a lot of border patrollers need to be told to get out of the way for true creativity to step in.
I love that. That is a fantastic closing note. So with that, thank you, Liz, so
Thank you.
much, and thank all of you.
Thank you.